But before we do that, let me the opening and welcome, and then we'll take it from there. Thanks.
Good morning, Professor Kaunda, and all the people, esteemed panelists who have joined us today, including all other participants. We are glad to have all of you engage here today. In the development discourse confronting public servants in the continent, there is an ongoing issue, which is how do we as public servants support our political principals and other seniors when they negotiate and conclude agreements concerning mining and mining activities in the continent. There are many stories, real anecdotes, as well as fake news about how some of the African countries have concluded mining agreements that have compromised the viability of economies in the continent, or some will even say that we sign agreements that give away our national wealth to foreign countries or foreign corporations, as it were. We thought, therefore, that as a National School of Government, we must take this conversation forward by getting some critical people who are engaged in this type of work in a variety of countries to come into a platform like this one, to engage openly about what lessons can we learn, what advice can we get, so that those of our officials who provide support to politicians and governments when they negotiate and conclude agreements must do so fully understanding that these contracts that they are entering into are very sensitive for local communities, but also for the national economies of the countries in the continent. There has been stories about the country that could grant a mining right to a particular company from a different country in lieu of that country or that company building infrastructure in a country. And as we know, a dam or a road can be built in a period of 3 years. And once that infrastructure has been built, people then will struggle to understand why is mining still continuing beyond the life of the building of the road, because people may not understand that the amount of money you may need to extract from that mining operation may take 10 years before you can fully repay the loan that you get in return for building some type of infrastructure. And oftentimes, it is not about bad contracting, but it's also about bad communication. So we have experts here that we wish to welcome in this platform today, who will be sharing with us some perspective based on the work that they have been doing in the African continent to advise governments and other critical stakeholders on this subject. So we welcome all of you. Thank you for joining the NSG platform, and we look forward to engaging you in many, many months and other sessions to come. Thank you very much, and all the best back to you, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Principal. Forgot to introduce myself, by the way. My name is Lakela Kaunda from the NSG. We have, as we said, a very rich program, and we have a moderator who will then take us through the main part of the program, and it's Ms. Ogo Okai Agibe. She's the head of capacity building unit at the African Legal Support Facilities. She does this for a living. At least it sounds very complicated, but for her it's very easy, because her task, her responsibility is to ensure that African countries, those participating, have the capacity to negotiate these contracts so that we are able at the end, as the principal was saying, when the road has been built, we don't lose sustainability. There's still a community that must reside there, and some revenue must be derived. So I'd like to hand over then to her. She will outline how the program will unfold and also introduce her panelists. Over to you, Ms. Okai Agibe.
Thank you, DDG Dr. Kaunda. So good morning and good afternoon, participants, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ogo Ohaya Higwe, and I am a principal legal counsel and the head of capacity building at the African Legal Support Facility, also known as the ALSF. So I will start by giving a few remarks about the ALSF and our collaboration here with the NSG. and why it is important for us to be discussing this topic today. It is a pleasure to join you for this ALSF-supported event by the National School of Government on structuring, negotiating, and managing mining concessions towards sustainable development in Africa. This is the first of two collaborations with the NSG on capacity building. The second will likely be later this year and will focus on infrastructure and PPPs, so please look out for it. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to share a few remarks about the capacity building mandate of the ALSF and the relevance of this particular training and its significance for the continent. The ALSF was established in 2008 by the African Development Bank at the request of African finance ministers who were calling for a facility to support their countries with first-class legal and technical capacity. As a result, since 2010, the ALSF has allocated more than $142 million to over 420 projects, providing legal advisory services, knowledge resource development, and capacity building in our key economic sectors, which include extractives and natural resources, PPPs and infrastructure, energy, and sovereign finance. We've done this in 50 African countries and have trained over 14,000 lawyers and government officials. The ALSF's mandate is to provide African countries with the legal and technical capacity necessary to independently and successfully transact complex international business. This mandate evokes a dual mission: immediate legal capacity for existing transactions and adequate legal capacity for future transactions. So we achieve this through structuring our advisory services projects to ensure knowledge and skills transfer during the provision of our advisory services, and through traditional capacity building activities such as this webinar and the dissemination of our knowledge products. One of our products, which I believe is relevant to mention to this forum, is the African Mining Legislation Atlas, which is a legislation gathering, organization, and dissemination project, which can be found on the website a-mla.org. Thus, if the ALSF achieves its objectives, eventually there should be enough local legal capacity to advise countries on their sovereign commercial transaction. Now, what is the relevance of today's specific training? The extractives industry is a vital source of economic activity and jobs in Africa and a major contributor to domestic income and wealth creation. However, we find that most governments heavily depend on foreign partners for access to information, for technology and financing in regards to exploring and exploiting their mineral assets. It is therefore important to have regular forums like these, where we address the issues of capacity asymmetry and discuss various ways in which they can be resolved. This will ensure that the countries are equipped to implement negotiation strategies that produce fair and sustainable contractual arrangements, thereby promoting broader industrial development and reducing dependence on foreign partners. In conclusion, the world is changing fast. For instance, the world is grappling with the challenges of climate change, and the transition away from fossil fuels is having a major impact on the minerals industry. As Dr. Kanda mentioned earlier, Africa is endowed with many of the most important minerals required for the energy transition, and therefore needs to be guided to maximize the benefits of their exploitation to the continent. African countries are also under pressure to accept unsolicited proposals and terms of agreement in the absence of updated laws and regulations to match the rapidly evolving mineral sector. This means that we as technical experts and advisors must be well versed in the past and present issues and prepared for the future issues. This webinar will give us the opportunity to learn from each other, to enable us to avoid making the same mistakes, and to adopt only the best practices that are in our country's best interests, such as transparency and accountability, balanced negotiations, fair and balanced terms, risk identification and management. At the end of this forum, I hope that the participants will have an enhanced understanding of how to structure, negotiate, and manage mining contracts. Thank you to all the participants, speakers, and partners who have made this event possible, and I look forward to an engaging discussion and our collective learning. So without further ado, I'm going to dive right into the webinar topic for today. Today, we will be discussing, do African countries have the required knowledge and capacity to structure, negotiate, and manage mining contracts? So as we've mentioned, the capacity of African countries to structure, negotiate, and manage mining contracts varies considerably, resulting in some African countries struggling to secure the best possible deals from mining companies. However, there is a growing trend of African countries renegotiating existing contracts and managing a greater share of the profits from their mineral wealth. So today we will be discussing the issue of structuring, negotiating, and managing mining contracts, and highlighting the risks associated with mining projects. Allow me to introduce the distinguished panel of experts who will be taking us through this conversation today. I'll start with Dr. Francis Mangani. Francis Mangani is an advisor on the African integration, the multilateral trade system, and development practice. He has worked with the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area as head of trade promotion and programs, and has been director of trade customs and monetary affairs with the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa. He has taught postgraduate and undergraduate programs in Uganda, Tanzania, and the UK, and is an accomplished author. Dr. Mangani is a fellow with the Center for Global Development and holds a doctorate in international economic law. Welcome, Dr. Mangani. With us also is Dr. Suleimanu Koni, who is the CEO of the Ghana Chamber of Mines, pardon me, please, having previously served as director responsible for analysis, research, and finance. Dr. Koni is a founding member of the steering committee of Ghana's EITI and the executive director of ECOWAS Federation of Chamber of Mines. He serves on the governing council of the University of Mines and Technology and is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Marketing UK, a member of the Institute of Directors Ghana, and a chemical engineer. Also with us today is Mr. Moses Tetlani, who is the Director of Mineral Affairs Division at the Ministry of Minerals and Energy, Botswana. He has worked in government for 25 years and has been with this ministry for 15 years. He is responsible for minerals policy formulation and investment promotion. He has served in the board of Botswana Ash and is currently a board member of Pelegano Village Industries, which is a non-profit company. We also have Ms. Maria Massini, a legal counsel and the regional coordinator for Lusophone Africa at the African Legal Support Facility. Prior to her role at the ALSF, she held positions as the Director of Legal Affairs at the National Petroleum Agency of Sao Tome and Principe, and as an advisor to the Minister of Petroleum and Mineral Resources of Timor-Leste. Mariam has also worked as a consultant for various civil society and international organizations, including the UNDP and the World Bank. With us also today is Professor Dieudonné Louis Tambwe, who holds a PhD in chemistry and process engineering and has been a top member of staff at the Ministry of Mines at the DRC, being in charge, among others, of mining litigation, fighting against mineral smuggling, and technical evaluation of mineral projects. Since 2009, he has been the Deputy Technical Director of the Technical Mining Coordination and Planning Unit. Professor Tambwe has also chaired the Technical Secretariat of the Government Committee for Reviewing the Mining Law of the DRC between 2012 and 2018, which resulted in the current DRC Mining Code that was launched in 2018. Also with us is Dr. Mchemwa Sinkala, who is an accomplished academic, marketer, and economist with more than 20 years teaching and industry experience and with a PhD in economics. Dr. Sinkala has extensive experience teaching courses in marketing, business administration, finance, and economics, both at undergraduate and postgraduate levels. He has published in both international and local social sciences journals. He is also a fellow of the Zambia Institute of Marketing, member of the Committee of Experts for Higher Education Authority, board member and chairperson of the Loans Committee at the Bank of China, and Director for Business Studies Division at the National Institute of Public Administration in Zambia. Finally, with us, we have Mr. Marvin Silawule, who is currently a senior economist at the Export Credit Insurance Corporation of South Africa. His focus is country risk analysis, risk pricing, and industry research. He has over 6 years of experience across corporate finance and export credit insurance. He has worked on several transactions covering mining, energy, agriculture, and agro-processing and manufacturing. Thank you all to the panelists for joining us today. And without further ado, I'm going to start with my first question, which I shall direct at Dr. Sinkala. Given the context of the conversation that we're having today, talking about Africa's numerous minerals, why do you think Africa is not benefiting from its mineral resources?
Thank you so much, moderator. And good afternoon and good morning for those that are joining us. We appreciate you being with us. Mining has been a cornerstone of a number of countries and whose GDP depends entirely on this very important sector. But indeed, we have not seen the benefits that Africans expect or what we expect from our minerals that we have. So if you look at the way negotiations have been done in the past, especially in the recent past, you notice that they are done in a much more politicized way. In other words, people do not take time to look at the agreements before signing them. So if you look at our topic today, we're trying to look at how these agreements should be. How can we make them sustainable? So Africa, going forward, needs to make sure that when we are negotiating, we sit down to negotiate these mining agreements or concessions. We need to make sure that we incorporate all environmental issues, and we make sure that we do the cost benefit analysis to ensure that the projects that we are embarking on have a significant impact on our economies. But what we've noticed also in the recent past is that when we are sitting down to negotiate these deals, we do not look at the less visible impact. And this is why we see no benefits trickling down to our economies. So if we basically look at it, lawyers would say, is it prima facie, just on the face of it? And we do not look at what will be the eventual benefit to the nation. So a number of countries have failed to come up with what we call sustainable investment promotion plan, where they should know which areas are available for investment, where mining activities can take place, and where no mining activities can take place. So we just look at, oh, this particular area has minerals. Therefore, an investor, please come and start doing activities in this area, not knowing that there are less visible impacts that definitely in 10 to 5 years will have an impact on the communities or the people around there. And many, we talk about things that will affect, for instance, underground water system, and it's something that we need to look at. And also, we need to develop a mechanism of taking care of this cost, because when we are getting these amounts from these investors, we feel it's like a huge amount, not knowing that actually most of it will go in dealing with issues to do with the environment, to do with social impact that the mines bring in our communities. And therefore, we need to develop more skills as Africans to identify these invisible effects of mining. And therefore, as a continent, we need to make sure that we develop discharge and emission standards. We need also to develop mine closure obligations to be applied to mining and mineral processing in Africa, because we've seen that these investors will come in after they've finished taking much of the money that they wanted, and they close and then leave us to deal with issues to do with the environment. But only if we take note of these less visible impacts on our environment, and make sure that decisions that we make benefit and remain sustainable for the benefit of our people, then we'll be on a better slate to benefit from the proceeds of what God has given us in terms of our resources.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Sinkala, for that thorough response. Indeed, it is an area that we typically do not avert our mind to, the less obvious effects of mining. And perhaps one of the reasons that we don't do that is because there isn't a lot of that technical capacity resident on the continent. So I would like to ask you, Mariam, what role can international institutions play in supporting African countries in developing their capacity to manage mining contracts? And in what ways has the ALSF enhanced the capacity of African governments and institutions to manage mining contracts independently?
Thank you, Ogor. And good morning or good afternoon to all participants, depending on your location. I would like to start by first greeting my fellow panelists and also thanking the organizers for the invitation and for putting together this event. So in response to your question, Ogor, I would say that international institutions can play a pivotal role in supporting African countries by helping them develop the capacity to manage mining contracts effectively through offering technical assistance, capacity building programs, and developing knowledge products to ensure that our governments can actually negotiate and manage contracts that maximize the benefits while also safeguarding our national interests. Besides this, and I also think that international organization also has a role to play because we can actually facilitate access to best practices and also helping in setting standards which can be followed by, can be adopted by the countries. We can also fund in terms of legal and technical expertise that is actually required to support governments in the negotiations, and also creating platforms for dialogue and especially peer-to-peer learning within among African governments. So as the African Legal Support Facility, we have a unique mandate, which you shared a little bit of details, because we are focused on offering legal advice and capacity building support to African governments in negotiating complex commercial transactions, which also includes the extractive industries sectors. And by helping countries with providing expert advisory services, our assistance is actually targeted at helping governments ensure that contracts are fair and equitable, and such as in order to reduce the risks of having exploitative agreements, as was mentioned by at the beginning in the opening remarks, and enhancing the long-term benefits for our countries. Also, besides the legal advice, the capacity building that we offer, we also assist countries in developing practical toolkits and other knowledge products. So in order to help them handle this type of transactions independently and effectively without without requiring the need of advisors, external advisors to the government. As you also mentioned, besides that, as the LSF, we also offer a wealth of resources online. As you mentioned, Ogor, the African Mining Legislation Atlas. Besides the African Mining Legislation Atlas, we also have the ALSF Academy platform, which provides government officials with access to specialized training models in the extractive industries, and that can be accessed at their convenience. So overall, with all these efforts as an international organization, our aim at the ALSF is actually to ensure that African governments are better prepared to negotiate fair mining contracts, and are actually capable of managing these contracts throughout the life cycles independently.
Thank you, Mariam, for that. I think it's important to emphasize that there are various institutions available for supporting governments at different levels to provide the capacity to ensure that the outcome for African countries is fair and balanced towards the countries, and to remove that asymmetry that is often experienced when you have a foreign, usually better equipped counterparty on the other side. But now I would like to ask Mr. Tetlani, given the gaps in capacity that have been that are usually experienced by African countries, what technical skills and knowledge do you think are most important for African countries to develop to effectively manage mining contracts?
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and the co-panelists and the audience. The skills or technical skills that I would say are required when I'm looking at usually the teams that we usually put together to negotiate mining contracts. Usually it will be the Ministry of Minerals and Energy, where you will have the geoscience, the mine engineering and economic modeling people for mining projects. And then we have the Ministry of Finance, which will bring in financial tax analysts to try and do in terms of the finance of the projects. And then we need also from Attorney General, the commercial legal drafters. So these are the skills that broadly you will need for such contracts. So I would say a mining contract, it has to facilitate first, and foremost, that the project becomes feasible. And that is the technical part. We have to look at the geological modeling, your mine engineering, the mine plan, and also as to whether it will generate cash flows that will make sure that the project survive. That's the first. And second, you are going to look at the project contributing to the economy. What benefits does it bring to the economy? So you have to balance these two, and not probably maybe say burden the project upfront with so much financial obligations that it may just die, collapse before it even starts. So this brings me to the efficient mining tax administration system that is very much required. Too many times that I think the public out there will think that mining companies should be probably pay more tax maybe than other businesses. Yes, in certain instances there are high profits that you realize in boom years. And in Botswana, we have, like, for example, a tax system that takes care of that. Is a variable in tax, variable tax income that, slides. When maybe the profits are up there, the taxable income probably will just slide up with that. And if they are not, it will go back to the base, which is a minimum of 22%. So you need an efficient tax administration system to ensure that, you don't kill projects, because some projects are marginal. Yes, we do have those that are highly profitable, where obviously the governments and citizens have to, have a fair share of those high profits. But again, you have to take care of those projects that are marginal. And then that's the tax. It has to be an efficient system, at the right level. And then the types of royalty systems that you have. You need royalties that, sort of are market-based. In Botswana, we have the gross market value, and that you pay royalties for different commodities, and it's important that, as I say, they are tied to the market rate at that time, because if they are set at a certain level that even maybe say when now times are tough, the company will be expected to pay maybe a lot more than they should, then again it can bring in problems to the cash flow. So you have to make sure that the royalty system is at the right level, and also is really linked to the market, dynamics. And then we have the elements of the corporate income tax. Yes, projects exchange hands. You have capital gains tax when a mining junior is selling to a major. So you also have to make sure that, yes, you do reap the benefits there as a government. But obviously some projects, they will be sold when they're struggling, they're on a deathbed. Definitely you have to have waivers in place for such. So you should have provisions for both the negative and the positive in a nutshell. And also you look at the economic returns of mining projects. They differ. As I just alluded to that, some are marginal, some are highly profitable. So therefore, these are the skills that you need, that people who are working for government agencies, they should be able to analyze and see that, when a mining company applies for mining license, you are able to assess, company A or project A, let me say, and project B and project C, and see what economic returns you expect from each one of these. And not to say necessarily you are going to apply different tax systems. No, it's just for you to appreciate that, at a time that probably maybe that such a mining company comes and says, oh, we are really in trouble, we maybe need royalty deferrals, then you had sight of that because of the personnel that you had that was analyzing such a project. It does not become a surprise. And my last comment will be, again, economic value to government or countries, can be derived in many ways. You can have private companies 100% owned, where government benefits royalties and taxes. You can have joint ventures, like in our case where we have Botswana government and TBS in a 50-50 joint venture, where now that means you'll have dividends, you have royalties, and you have taxes. And then you can also have, public or state-owned enterprises now where, you are 100% owned by government. So as you can see, I'm moving from one spectrum to the other end. So all these are available, avenues in which you can always, as a government, get a revenue coming into the kitty through, this kind of, I would say, company arrangements. So I think, yes, those skills, the technical for mining, in terms of your geologists, your mine engineers, your financial analysts, and then, moving on to the financial and tax analysts, and also now the legal, they are very much core to getting the rightful mining contracts. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Tetlani. You have given us a very detailed spread of the skills that are necessary for analyzing the various mining projects that should be considered by a government. But I would now like to ask Professor Tambwe, in all this analysis that we're doing of the potential projects, we also need to analyze the risks associated with the project. So what role does risk assessment play in ensuring African countries receive a fair share of the benefits from their mining projects? Professor Tambwe.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this first question. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this web forum to give us the opportunity to discuss and share some knowledge and experience on such fundamental questions regarding mining resources governance in Africa. Thank you for having me to represent the DRC, Ministry of Mines, and it's my pleasure to contribute to provide insights on challenges and critical aspects of managing mining contracts in Africa. Now, regarding your question, which is, if I've got it well, what role is it? That one? What role risk assessment? Yes, it is that one. What role does risk assessment play in ensuring African countries receive a fair share of the benefits from their mining projects? Well, I think it's a common to say that risk assessment is a crucial element, especially when it comes to mining projects. Mining projects that are most often characterized by high density capital. That's huge investments are there. And to ensure that African countries receive a fair share of the benefits from their mining projects, I think I agree. We need that risk assessment, even though in my opinion, because we've been see this too much sometimes, it can be biased if there are some exaggerated perception of certain parameters. That's the only thing. So when it is well done, it is a really good thing. But sometimes, unfortunately for African countries, at the big market of capital markets, there are some parameters, that are creating some frails, those things, and it can be a problem. Having said so, I can say that the following key roles among several for the risk assessment are to identify and mitigate risks. A comprehensive risk assessment helps identify potential risks related to the environment, social, economic, and political factors. And if we understand those risks, we can develop strategies to mitigate them and to ensure that the mining project will proceed smoothly and sustainably. Risk assessments allow us theoretically to negotiate fair contracts. Because an effective risk assessment will inform us, will inform the negotiation process. If you understand the risks that are involved, the government can negotiate the terms that can protect better their countries, their population, and this in the interest of those population, therefore beneficiating to them. I understand by this that if it is the contract is well done, we will ensure that we have this local content, which is respected, the environment protection, and the community development. These things in our Mining Act, which has been reviewed and launched in 2018, we have tried to integrate them, and it is really something. Okay, we can talk about. I will develop maybe later on. A good risk assessment helps to attract responsible investors, because those investors will come where there is a transparent and thorough risk assessment. They will come where they know that the ethic is respected, is taken in consideration, and they will be likely to engage in projects where those risks are well managed. We have seen this in DRC. For a long time, we had those big investors. I mean, they were preferring to send sometimes some minor companies to come, because we are a post-conflict country, and there are some risks there to manage. And it's only when we establish, for instance, our mining register, which is a cadastre, and with rules that were very, very safe, knowing that the first come, first serve, that we have started seeing them, even though, and I'll come back later on some practices that should be avoided, like corruption, whatever. And all of these are part of the risk, which should be properly assessed in order to attract the major investors. And another role is to ensure compliance and to have for monitoring. And yeah, I will give just another one. And we can also, by a good risk assessment, enhance the level of negotiation. Because if you understand those risks that are associated to the mining projects, the country can have a better position whilst negotiating. That's what I can say. And to conclude, I would say for this point, that if you address properly the challenges in enforcing mining contracts and incorporating through thoroughly the risk assessment, that might be, in my opinion, the essential steps that African countries need to maximize the benefit from their mining rental. And well, when I'm saying mining rental, this is for us, but let's say the mining projects, when we consider all the parties that are involved in the project, that is the country which is hosting, and the investor who has come to I mean, hopefully has discovered a target, and he has developed, he has constructed, and he's already operating. Yes. So if we have that proper assessment, in my opinion, we can do better. Of course, and I agree with my predecessor, we need to understand, to fully understand those risks on the whole chain of value of minerals extraction, which start from the research up to, I would say, not only trading, but also to the closure of the mine. So we need to understand all of this for us African countries, knowing that the investor is coming to do money, to the benefit, but it is our responsibility to make sure. But great investors, they will be aware of the fact that they need, for their own credibility, to ensure that, okay, those populations that are around the projects are getting a fair revenue, and that they're not destroying the environment. So it is something we need to have it really in mind, and knowing that it should be benefiting to us African countries if we do a proper assessment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Tambo. You've taken us through the whole identification and mitigation of risks and all that we should consider. But I'm going to come now to Mr. Silawole, who is with the ECIC, and ask that, as the Export Credit Insurance Corporation of SA, how have you navigated risk on the continent?
Thank you, Mr. Ogo. Thank you, my fellow panelists and the audience at large. Just to start, I'm Marvin Silawole, and I'm the senior economist for Export Credit Insurance Corporation. We are an SOE belonging to the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition, a ministry within the South African national government. Our particular mandate is to provide political and commercial risk insurance to South African exporters who export goods and services. So in terms of navigating risk with projects that we've done on the continent, we'll be looking at risk allocation, mitigation. We take the direction of the market, and just to put a reminder that ECIC, we don't fund projects, but we ensure or provide cover for these projects. So when allocating for risk, price the risk as it is presented to us, and that way we can make a call according to some of our internal risk pricing models, which look at country risk, specific country risk issues, such as expropriation of assets, currency, convertibility, and so forth. So we are simply managing the risk, and we also engage the market to propose solutions to mitigate the risks involved in the particular transaction. So in this situation, it would be for mining transactions. And this is where we hold hands with the lender and participate in lender calls and in discussions with the lenders, technical advisors, in the best way forward to ensure that commodity price risks are mitigated, risks associated with expropriation of assets, and risks associated with perhaps a currency transfer or inconvertibility issue. But also taking into note, when we enter countries onto the continent, we are guided by the legislative framework and of that particular country in terms of the governing agreements before we can support any transaction. And all this legislation and the governing agreements needs to be in place, authorized by the necessary parties in the transactions, so from project sponsor all the way to the lenders, before ECIC can support or cover that transaction. But also as part of responsible lending practices, we support deals that don't further indebt a particular country or where there's a worsened debt overhang. So we do practice global standards of underwriting processes and utilize global standards, global risk management standards. But also just to touch before I wrap up, we have the proof is in the pudding, my boss always says, and we have done about a few projects on the continent, particularly mining. We have supported a copper mine in Zambia, and in this instance provided 100% political risk insurance and 85% commercial risk insurance. We also have supported an open gold pit mine in Liberia, and I think that one also followed the same structure. And lastly, we supported a titanium mine in Mozambique. And these are transactions and deals as the ECIC that have been that we have successfully assisted in mitigating the country risk issues. Obviously, doing our internal risk assessment frameworks, which are aligned to global standards of risk mitigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silawule, for telling us a little bit more about your institution and what to expect from how your institution addresses risk mitigation on the continent. But while we're still on the topic of risk, I'd like to come to you, Dr. Kone, and ask what legal and technical frameworks can African countries establish to manage the risks associated with mine closure and environmental reclamation? This kind of ties into what we discussed earlier about the unseen aspects of the mining contract. So we speak a lot about financing and the benefits to the country, but mine closure and environmental reclamation sometimes are left behind. So what legal and technical frameworks can African countries establish to manage the risks associated with mine closure and environmental reclamation?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and good morning to fellow panelists. Thank you very much for the opportunity to engage in this very important conversation about our continent and how to leverage our mineral resources for broad-based development. One key theme which in the recent past has come to the fore when it comes to managing risks associated with mine closure essentially is to effectively foresee and forecompute the cost of environmental and closure costs ahead of time. And the watchword is ahead of time and not at the end of the project. So first and foremost, you should have the end in mind, even as you are thinking about your fiscal agreement or fiscal regime and so on and so forth. And these have to be computed the cost of rehabilitation, reclamation, the disturbance to the portions of the concession, which needs to be reclaimed, have to be computed. And once that is done, we enter into what we call a reclamation security agreement. This requires that the company would actually set aside some funding, through an agreement between the company and then the environmental regulator. Most countries would have the EPA, and this will be done, and then these monies are actually set aside. And then the expectation is that, there are unlikely situation where the company doesn't have the funds at the end of its mine life to rehabilitate as expected, return it as close as possible to its previous situation. The expectation is that these monies would be called upon to be used to reclaim and rehabilitate as expected. So generally, that has been a standard in the last few years. Before then, we never had the foresight to be able to do this. Then you have countries where companies will come to the end of their life. Sometimes before you realize they are outside the shores of the country and they declare bankrupt. And then the government and its people are actually left with this huge liability to actually manage. So this has been going on pretty well in a few countries I know about, especially in Ghana here, where the major companies under the umbrella of the chamber are required by law to actually post these reclamation bonds. Normally, these bonds are actually lodged in escrow accounts, and the earnings actually go to the company, but these are actually supervised closely by the environmental regulator, the EPA. So in a nutshell, this is what I would want to suggest for the consideration of the whole of Africa. I know some countries are already implementing this, but I think it would be good if this becomes a standard for the continent going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kony, for your response. It is indeed important to consider this ahead of time and not at the end of the project like we often tend to do. So part of this conversation today is also supposed to talk about the structuring and negotiation of these projects in the context of sustainable development. So Dr. Sinkala, I would like to ask, how can Africa's mineral resources help promote sustainable development?
Thank you so much. If you look at most African nations, one of the, like I indicated earlier on, one of the major source of revenue is the revenue that they generate from their minerals. But how can we make it sustainable, and how can we make it more beneficial for our continent? And this is where now we have to move from the approach that we've taken in the past when it comes to negotiating these contracts. I am much more specialized on the Chinese investors, and I'll try and speak from the Chinese point of view. If you look at the Chinese governments, most of them are interested in these minerals. And what they do is that they have about 80% capacity to process the minerals. And what we can do is that as Africans, when you go to these investors of that nature, let's try by all means to entice them, bring them into our country. Let them not take our minerals in raw form. They need to take our minerals, they need to process them. In other words, we should be talking about the issues of beneficiation, value addition. I think a number of African countries have developed policies to deal with industrialization, but most of us have not implemented that part. And therefore, when we go to negotiate, we need to bring in the fact that we want these minerals, most of them, to be used within our country. And then we get to see the benefit trickling down in terms of job creation. Even our gross domestic product in most countries will go up. I can talk about Zambia. Zambia has been mining for about 100 years. But can we talk about Zambia's gross domestic product? We're talking about an average of about $25 billion US. But let's look at the resources that we have as a nation. What is it that we can do to add value and make sure that more benefits trickle down to the people? In the initial stages of mining, for instance, in Zambia, we saw a growing trend of new infrastructure development in terms of social amenities. We had football teams being sponsored. All these things were provided before we went to privatize our mines. And therefore, even in the new contracts, we need to make sure that certain things that will benefit the communities, certain things that will grow our economy are incorporated in this contract. Value addition should be the first one. And then you'll have this multiplier effect on the economy where good jobs, and for your own information, is that these investors that are coming here, they will do what you tell them to do. If you are flexible, they'll take advantage of you. But if you use the law and put certain legislative processes clear and easy, they'll follow them, they'll see the benefit trickling down to every Zambian or to every African. So value addition should be one of them. Let's not just have books or papers where you have these policies and we're not implementing. We need to be to the book. In my dissertation at PhD, I looked at these investors. When they intend to come, they will not look at what it is. They will look at what is it that you have. And they'll do anything possible to come to our countries and use these resources. And therefore, we have everything within our hands to ensure that we provide guidance and we get the benefits that we want from these minerals. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sinkala. Indeed, I do agree very strongly that value addition is one of the cornerstones of sustainable development of minerals on the continent. And I'm going to come to you, Dr. Mangeni, because in your experience at the African Union and the African Continental Free Trade Area, you probably have come across the Africa Green Mineral Strategy, which is being developed by the African Union, the African Development Bank, the ALSF, UNECA, and some other sister agencies. So the African Green Mineral Strategy does touch on sustainable development of minerals in Africa, but I would like you to give us a little bit of an introduction to the strategy and your opinion on how this strategy could help support sustainable development of minerals on the continent. Dr. Mangeni.
It seems we have lost Dr. Mangeni.
We seem to have lost Dr. Mangeni. I do have a couple other questions for some of our participants. I will come back to Mr. Tetslani and just ask that, so when earlier, Dr. Kony talked us through how to address environmental risks. And when we have strict environmental risk guidelines like this, how can African countries balance the risk associated with such stricter environmental regulations with the need to attract mining investments? How can they make it attractive for financing?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Well, I don't know whether we can make it attractive, but what I believe we can do is that, as Dr. Kony, has indicated, it needs to be, factored in upfront, not somewhere in the middle and at the end of the project, because it involves significant amount of funds. So you need to really have it at the beginning of the project. So in Botswana, when a company applies for mining license, you will find that they've worked out what probably the environmental cost of rehabilitation is likely to be. And we even encourage that, as they mine, where they are able to rehabilitate, they do that, because it helps them that the costs now will be much more, probably smaller than maybe at a future point in time. But having said that, also the legislation obligates the companies to set up trust funds or rehabilitation funds. Immediately, the excavator hits the overburden, there should be a sort of a bank guarantee or a rehabilitation fund that is set up, obviously, I mean, you're going to be like, as a mining company, you're not going to put huge amounts all at once, but you'll be, as you mine, as you get your revenue, you always, put something aside, and probably, hopefully, if, companies adhere to that, definitely it becomes easier at the end of the project for them to rehabilitate because they've been putting money aside, those bits and pieces. So I really concur with Dr. Coney. And actually, the costs of looking after the environment is significant. And this is why you need such, funds alongside, because there will be times along the journey when probably times will be tough. And you need to ring-fence those funds because, yeah, we have had cases where the funds were not ring-fenced, and then, the company would delve into those. And it becomes very impossible to replace those funds, and now when you are nearing towards the end of the project, because that's the time that now you are not getting, huge returns. So therefore, it's always good that, right at the start, you factor this in. And from an investment promotion perspective, which is one of the, portfolios that I oversee, you have to be transparent, as a government, when you go out to these seminars, conferences, and you tell or you investors to your shores, let them know about probably the incentives that you have in terms of your taxes, your royalties, or whatever maybe incentive that you have other than those. And also, let them know about, the obligations of looking after things such as the environment. It shouldn't be a surprise that, now when they hit your shores, it's only then that now they learn of, some sort of this obligation. So it is always good to be transparent and, make sure that you really inform your audience or your would-be investors about that. And, there are no shortcuts to looking after the environment because where there have been, such, it has proven disastrous where, in a case like where maybe one day, tailings dam burst and it caused a lot of damage and even fatalities. So there are no shortcuts really to looking after the environment. But the good thing is that for certain mining of certain minerals, it's always easy, like your coal, it's always easy to be rehabilitating as you mine. But also, I believe even other mining, rather than other mineral types, it's always still advisable that you do that as you continue to mine. And also, this is where probably now it means that you always have to look at the rates, for your your royalties, your taxes, because now this environmental obligation, we have found that in most cases, sometimes if it is not done, then the liability goes to government and the environmental liability, because I mean those companies will have probably now left the country. So it's always good to have it in place ahead of time. And I believe this is a conversation that must be had between government and mining companies right up front, not to be left for a later time. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Setlani. As we're drawing close to the end of this session, I'd like to just refresh our memories about the topic of the panel conversation, which is, do African countries have the required knowledge and capacity to structure, negotiate, and manage the mining contracts? We have spoken a little bit about capacity, about the items within the contracts which need to be structured, about the risks and the ways of considering and mitigating the risks of these contracts. But finally, I would like to ask the last question of the day to Dr. Coney. In your opinion, do African countries actually have the capacity to structure, negotiate these contracts? And if not, how can African countries build capacity to independently assess the value of their assets?
That's a very important question, Madam Moderator. And I think it's a mixed bag. I don't want to say that African countries don't have the capacity, because you have different countries. Some have been around for so many years, including my country, Ghana. Others are, early birds, so to speak. Some have just started. So you would want to assume that the countries which have had so many years of experience around mining itself, the policy around it and all of that, should not generally say that they don't have the capacity to do it. And those who don't have, I think that in the spirit of cooperation, we should be able to share capacity across the continent. We meet at international fora, we get to know each other. Engagements like this helps the continent to really network people of competence, people with the requisite skills, and therefore we are able to call on each other. We have, the African Development Bank, and so on and so forth, who actually provide, guidance and so on and so forth. But whatever it is, where countries don't have the capacity, I think essentially is to identify what the capacity gaps are. Is it financial? Is it technical? Is it human resource and so on? And we need to identify this and then find a strategy to actually bridge those gaps. Is the willingness to do it. And I have always said that as a person, there's a role for FDI and then there's a role for indigenous participation in our industry. And I'm not just talking about local content where you are just making sure that your countrymen and countrywomen are participating in the supply chain. That's not what I'm talking about. Especially for countries who have been mining for decades, for years, for centuries, so to speak. So the mindset around negotiation capacity should be quite different. And it is not just about the fiscal take of the state, because if we overly focus on the fiscal state, like someone mentioned earlier, there's a whole value chain of mining, which can be leveraged for broad-based development. In fact, when a question was asked about who are the competent people we need to put together for negotiation, interestingly for me, as I sat and I listened to the responses, I realized that even development experts within African countries are oftentimes left behind. And for me, these are some of the issues, because see, mining is not just a source of rent, but it's a whole development. I'll give you an example. In my country, Ghana, a new company comes up and is going into a virgin area who doesn't know mining at all. And the refrain is about the same. Oh, we are going to get this by way of royalty and corporate tax and so on and so forth. But trust me, where this company is located, if you have to use the general means of transportation to get the goods out there, you are going to interfere with the road network, you're going to be health and safety issues and so on and so forth. Let's think outside the box. And I called the company and said, look, is it possible you look at freshwater transport? And the company said, why not? Can you also consider air transport? I said, why not? So like someone said, look, these companies may be more than willing to do what we desire if we think more creatively. So I don't want us to limit this conversation to just fiscal, but the broad, in fact, the African Mining Division talks about it. And it all starts from the beginning of the negotiations. If you know you have a resource in a part of the country, the real question you ask yourself is, how can I leverage that resource for the development of that community, if not the whole of the country? And that would actually inform the kind of thinking and the kind of people you bring around the table for the negotiation. So in terms of metrics, yes, we can say that, look, African countries, we don't have the capacity. But generally, it's because we limit ourselves so much. And we have been around the circuit in mining conferences across the years. And we know the experts. We have our own Paul Jordan. He's been preaching the word of development on the back of mining. We all know this. But oftentimes, as we have learned today, when we are mentioning the experts around the table, we limit them to who we know, the legal people, the geologists, and the mining engineers, the guys from the Ministry of Finance. And that's where it ends. Let's think more broadly. We have the capacity. We can do much better than we've ever done for the benefit of our continent. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Connie. I think that was a very important note. Thank you very much, Dr. Connie. I think that was a very important note to end on. And just to take us back to what we have discussed today, finishing with what Dr. Connie has said, it is important to identify the gaps, identify these capacity gaps, and find the willingness to bridge them. And we have also identified that there are several organizations which offer the capacity building support to the country. So once those gaps are identified, if any of those organizations can be approached to provide support to the government to ensure a level playing field. There also does exist certain capacity within the continent. So as Dr. Coney explained, it's important to share it amongst the countries. Earlier, we also discussed that it is important to, in negotiating and structuring these agreements, it is important to consider the less obvious benefits and risks also, and develop skills to identify the invisible effects of mining. And in discussing the risks related to mining contracts, we also identified that it is important to identify and mitigate risks, particularly those risks of environmental risks, social risks, economic risks, and political risks. And these will enhance the ability of countries to negotiate and structure proper mining contracts for themselves. So all in all, I would like to thank the panelists for their time and their contributions to the conversations today. And it's time for the question and answer portion of this session. So we will take some questions. There's a question on how can we be involved from the occupational health, safety, and environmental perspective? How can you be involved in mining projects? I think maybe Mr. Tetlani, would you be able to address this question on how an occupational health and safety, how someone involved in occupational health and safety, and environment can be involved in mining projects?
Thank you, moderator. Usually prior to a project, you always have the environmental and social impact analysis. So this is where we will have our SHE officers, safety, health, and environment, officers, getting involved. This will be probably on the side of the mining company and also on the government side as they go around consulting communities to find out, what the projects, how it will impact, on the community around. And therefore, if you just a private individual, you can probably partake in such meetings because in Botswana, a company usually will do that for maybe an extended period of time, probably maybe close to 3-4 months, going around and it's holding several meetings with the local, maybe council, and then the central government departments like the Department of Environmental Affairs, and also, looking at the businesses that operate around those areas because they have to take into account all the environmental and social, factors of that project. So, someone in that area can be involved in that manner, whether maybe you are on the government side, or the company side, or just, an individual, probably maybe a part of the community. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tetlani. We also have a question about, which I'm going to direct to Professor Tambwe. So with critical minerals boom globally, how can African countries take advantage of that? So how can African countries take advantage of the boom in the demand for critical minerals globally? Professor Tambwe.
Thank you so much, Madam the Moderator. Yes, with this critical mineral boom, how can we take advantage? Well, I think Africa is, first of all, and I think we agree on this, Africa is very well endowed in mineral resources, especially those that are called critical, meaning critical for this transition of energy, critical also for the numeric transition, meaning that Africa has a rare opportunity to develop from its resources. I liked what I said, Dr. Kone. I as a earth sciences specialist, as a metallurgist, I used to say that the mining sector is intrinsically an industrialized and industrializing sector. It means we can take advantage of what we will be getting from our soil, not only to extract and hopefully treat at least partly on our continent, therefore giving jobs to our youth, therefore giving them a new hope, because this is a boost which should benefit us. And then by selling the products, I think we get capital that can be used to a lot of projects to be invested here in Africa. And when I'm saying this, this local content will get it. Of course, we need to have good contract that establish how we're doing this. Not only contract for extraction, but contract for I call this a transfer of property. Actually, we are transferring our minerals, critical minerals, and we're getting back a transfer of funds. We need to use them properly. We need to use them properly. So, in my opinion, I think this is a great opportunity for Africa. We've lost some others in the past, but this one we should be able to capitalize. And according to what I'm hearing in all these fora, I'm going in South Africa, in Zambia, even the ZIMEC last year, I see that we have that we are more and more getting the point. And once again, I will agree once again with others, especially with Dr. Kane. We need to just mutualize our resources, our capacities, and have a common strategy so that we can say, okay, to those who are coming, for instance, with the MSP, those who are coming from European Union to ask this and that, to tell them, okay, this is our position, because they will come. I've been in Yaoundé a couple of months ago. We were there, African country, Caribbean and Pacific countries, but European Union was there, and European Union was there to say what? Here, guys, we European were here so that we can get the best prices from your products. And I said, come on, how can it be like that? We should be there to say, okay, we are doing something which should be a win-win. That is, you are getting the fair price, but you are selling also to a fair price. But if someone is coming to tell you, okay, I want just to secure my, where I'll be taking these minerals, and we African, we don't have a common vision, a common policy, a common strategy to say, okay, how can we benefit as much as possible, as fair as possible, then we'll be lost. So we need to understand this. It's a great opportunity. And Africa is very, very well placed. We are really on the top, but we need to just mutualize whatever we have. Alone, probably there is no one can make it, but all together. And I'm seeing this coming out. Okay, we have this mining vision from the African Union, which is good, but we need now to work on strategy. And I know from meeting to forum to fora, we're just saying the same things, but we need to conceive that strategy. We need to know exactly what do we want. And unfortunately, 2 months ago, I was there and I was saying, my God, what am I doing here? Apparently, other people, they know exactly why they're coming to join us today. But we don't know that this is our opportunity. This is maybe our time to try to make a change in our history.
Yes, and
And
to
I
do it.
think the opportunity is there. Let's go. I agree. We're not that weak. We have some specialists. We need to build up capacities. That's sure. But once again, if we put them together and we know exactly where we're going together, probably we can benefit better together.
Excellent.
That's my
I
point.
agree. I
Thank you.
100% agree with what you said, Dr. Tambo. And just to add on a little bit, I think that a lot of the countries are aware of the position that we're in now with having the minerals and the growing demand. But I think that in this particular period, we are experiencing a little bit more caution. Most countries have learned from the previous mineral resources booms, oil boom and resource curse, and are trying to avoid finding themselves in that same situation. And you mentioned the Africa Mining Vision already and the AU. And I had mentioned earlier, this is what Dr. Mangeni was supposed to talk about, the Africa Green Minerals Strategy, which is focused specifically on these minerals, and it's to create a framework and a platform for how African countries are going to approach the exploitation of these transition minerals. And the idea being that, again, earlier, what the panelists had mentioned, value addition as part of the sustainable development of the minerals. The AGMS is very heavy on value addition, on developing certain industries, for example, the electric vehicle battery industry within the continent. So there's that value addition, there's that beneficiation before we start looking externally. So these are some of the things, and it's part of the importance of this conversation. We have all these gaps in capacity and all these specific areas of specialization, but what is the backbone of everything would be an enabling regulatory policy legislative environment that is cohesive around the continent, and to ensure that everybody is being carried along and doing the right thing for the benefit of each of the countries. So on that note, actually, there's one more question, which is addressed directly to Mr. Tetlane. And I hope that you can answer it briefly, because I think we're running out of time. But the final question says, Mr. Tetlane previously said that projects shouldn't be burdened by too much financial obligations at the start, otherwise they may not take off. He later said, we should be upfront about projects' liabilities at the start so that companies don't run and leave the problem behind. How does he think African countries should reconcile these two objectives?
Thank you for the question, Madam Moderator. A mining contract is always a give and take when you're in such negotiations. So that is why now you do have financial obligations and you have the cash flow, which is income that is generated from the project. So as a government, sometimes, at the start of the project, usually this company will have explored and now they found the resource, they are going construction phase. In the first 2 years, they don't make any money. And they still, putting money into the project. So it is during those times that we don't expect them to be maybe, say, contributing immensely to maybe, say, corporate social responsibility projects. After now they start generating some revenue, then you can expect, maybe after the second year, third year, and so forth, you can expect them to be doing such. But right at the start of the project, in Botswana, we have, immediate write-off for capital expenditure when you ordered your machinery that you are now using to probably now start your mining. So there is that provision to make sure that, we relieve you of the burden so that, we have to write off that, maybe that capital expenditure. And also you have carry forward, your losses that you can always set off against taxes. So where those provisions are, they can, make the burden light on the company. So you should have a give and take kind of, approach. And it's just basically, just to conclude, it comes to the sequencing of these financial obligations and, probably the income or cash flows that kind, putting them in the right order that, yes, it is at the
Oh no, we seem to have lost Mr. Tetlani for a bit. Okay, that was the last question. So I'm going to hand over back to NSG now to take us through the final process of this event. Thank you very much once again to the panelists and to all the participants for listening in and for contributing with your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to our moderator for that very informative session. And before I wrap up, let me just check. Principal, you had a question. There's something you wish to raise before we do the closing? I think you wrote something in the chat and they didn't see it. There was another question, I think, or more of a comment on the health risk, but let me just check with you, Principal, quickly.
No, I'm okay. We will deal with this when we do the next session on the Belt and Road Initiative and the next session on using critical minerals for industrialization. So I'm okay. Thanks once again to all the panelists and back to you, Program Director.
Thank you very much. It's been a very informative session. We appreciate the time that you took as a panelist, but more importantly, our participants, because without them, we wouldn't have a session. The discussion has made it clear that there was a reason for this webinar. It's indeed an incredibly important topic. As we said earlier, we boast about how Africa is endowed with minerals. If you go to any AU meeting, our presidents would be saying how much we have, but they will always raise this concern. Are these minerals a curse? Do they become a curse? Do they bring, at times, conflict into our countries where we find that even though we have negotiated our contracts well, but we cannot manage the security aspect, the security situation, so which then informs us that we need to look at the structuring of these agreements and the contracts very well to take care of those issues such as beneficiation, the social labor plans, where there's a mine, we want to see community development, the schools, the health, the clinics. Does it become part of the contracts and the negotiations and the agreements? In South Africa, we're also looking at safety and security, where the companies will mine and extract and go. When they feel it's no longer profitable, they will go leave an open mine, and then we end up with illegal mining. Illegal miners end up with violence and crime affecting the local communities. Those are some of the issues. Conflict diamonds, and then there's someone who also raised the issue of impact on the environment, the health, disease. So we are happy to have these minerals, but it means therefore we need to do better as a continent. The session has indicated that we do have the capacity to structure these contracts, but we definitely still need to do better so that every child in Africa benefits in the long run. We don't look at short-term profitability, but long-term profitability and social and sustainability for our continent. Without taking too much time, therefore, much appreciation to our moderator, Ms. Oko, Akibe, and also to all our participants. Without you, there would be nothing. And the panelists, our expert panel. Much appreciated. We hope to see you when we host again as the NSG, as this is ongoing discussions. Thank you very much. We are done. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you so much.